Good morning and welcome to the Belong Collective. The Belong Collective is an inclusive, Jesus-shaped community practicing the way of love for the good of all, and we're so glad that you're with us this morning or whenever you're watching. Maybe you're watching after this premiered in the evening or another day of the week instead of Sunday, and that's exciting. We're glad you're here. Currently, we're meeting digitally. We do have some in-person gatherings coming in February, assuming everything is safe and we're able to gather in person. So stay tuned for those. You can go to our website, actually, to find out all that information. So we have an events page at our website, which we update regularly. So if you go there, you see nothing, come back, check back later. There will be stuff coming up on there. We will be posting details soon. We also have a lot of other stuff on our website. If you want to support us, you can support us there. We also have socials. We have an Instagram. We have a Facebook. So please go follow us. We also have a private group where people can share prayer requests for the Belong Collective. If that's something you're interested in, you can email me, justin@thebelongcollective.org, and I can get you into that Facebook group, or you can find it and request entry just under the Belong Collective under groups. So we have a really important event coming up, a QCF meetup watch party event, and I actually got a chance to talk to Kaylee about that this week, and so I'm going to show a clip of Kaylee and I chatting about the QCF watch party. Here it is. Hey everyone, I'm here with Kaylee. Kaylee is going to be running a QCF watch party. Kaylee, what is QCF? If you had to explain what QCF is.
So Queer Christian Fellowship is kind of a space that was created where LGBTQ people can feel safe and explore questions of faith that they may have had or developed during their faith journey, or growing up in the church, maybe not growing up in the church. And then it's also a space that allies can get more information and knowledge in like an appropriate and kind way at the same time.
Awesome. Yeah. I've been to QCF a couple times in person, and this year it's all digital. I was actually planning on going. Bummer. I was planning on going to Albuquerque, but it's all digital this year. So you'll be hosting a watch party. So what are the dates again? I think it's the 20th through the 23rd, 24th, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all different kinds of times. So if someone wants to sign up, but they're not really sure what time they're going to be able to commit to, they're not signing up to do all 3 days if they sign up, right? They can sign up and then you send them a schedule, and then they can kind of determine what fits best with their work schedule and just let you know, or their life schedule.
Yeah. So the beauty of this kind of drop in, stop by whenever you can, is that you can drop in for just the sessions that you think are relevant to you or that you're comfortable with. You can stay for one session, you can come for 5, you can come for 1 day or all 3 if that's your passion. So it's really flexible, more so than really any other conference type is. So.
Cool. And you're located in York, correct? So they'll get your address when they sign up. You'll get them your address so they can show up. What do you envision the vibe to be like? Is it going to be like hanging out, conversational, kind of afterwards? I mean, the idea of having like a watch party, it's kind of, to me, what I think is cool about it is like you get the chance to maybe even like debrief a little bit after each of the sessions, maybe a little bit. Is that kind of what you're visioning?
Yeah, I think that it'll definitely be very dependent on who's there and what we want to talk about and what the questions are. And if we want to talk for an hour after a session about like the questions that we have continuing, then that's, we have the space and time for that. So I think, that's the beauty of the structure, that there isn't much.
Awesome. And you'll have plenty of snacks and stuff for people to partake in, correct?
Yeah, the plan is to have snacks and meals for all 3 days. And allergy friendly. I'm personally gluten and dairy intolerant. So welcome any people with like food allergies or restrictions. The earlier that I know those things, the easier it is for me to kind of
Yeah.
dodge those bullets. But the goal is to have something for everyone. So
Sweet, sweet. Well, okay, so let's tell people what they got to do. They got to go to thebelongcollective.org. They got to hit the Connect tab, I believe it is. And then down from the Connect tab, the very first thing you click is QCF Watch Party sign up. And you just got to sign up. And they can sign up even if they aren't sure they're going to come, but maybe they just want more information from you. Maybe they just want to start a dialogue with you about, hey, I'm thinking about coming, but here's my questions. That's okay, right? You're still fine with them.
yep, yeah. Absolutely don't stress out if you're not sure if you can come. Like if you just want more information, better to know than not. And even day of, like if you change your mind January 20th and you're like, just sign up and we'll make space for you. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting this. I think this is going to be a really cool opportunity for a lot of people. And I'm thankful for you taking the time and opening your own personal space, your home, to others, to further this conversation and hopefully work toward a more inclusive and understanding world for the church, but also for LGBT individuals and allies. So I really appreciate it.
I'm so excited.
Awesome. So QCF is going to be a good time. Make sure you sign up for that. Next, final announcement for today. Really big announcement. We have a survey coming up. It's like a church-wide, community-wide survey to understand just a little bit about your experience at TBC, kind of what you see the future of TBC being, and just a lot of random questions, a lot of things that for the board, we want to kind of hear from you, hear what you're thinking, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and ultimately, as we are at a crossroads on some decisions, helping us be better informed by how you're feeling. So that survey is going to come out this coming week. You'll get an email about it. It'll be posted to our socials, and it's going to be open for a while. We're going to leave it open for 2-3 weeks to make sure that everyone in our community has a chance to fill it out. Hey, if you've been here 2 weeks, fill out that survey. If this is your very first time with us and you feel like a kinship with who we are, fill out that survey. Everyone is welcome to fill out that survey. We want to ensure that it includes everyone who considers TBC to be something that gives them life or that they are connected to in some way. We want to hear from you, so make sure that you fill out that survey when it comes out. There will be, again, a link emailed to you this coming week, and then there will be it'll be on our socials as well, and we'll be sharing it multiple times, so you definitely won't miss it. And like I said, it'll be up for a few weeks, so just look forward to that coming. I'm guessing the survey itself will be, you'll probably have to put maybe like 10 minutes aside to fill it out. I think it's like 20 to 30 questions, maybe 30 questions. Some of them are super easy, either or type questions. But some might be like, oh, I haven't thought about that yet. What would I want there? And like, you might have to actually ponder a little bit. So I would say, set aside 10 to 15 minutes to do it. Whenever you have 10 to 15 minutes free, it would really, really, really benefit us to get your perspective. We want to know your thoughts. So when that comes out, take some time to do that for us. Really appreciate it. So glad you're with us this Sunday morning. Thanks again for being here. We are continuing our part 2 of our death penalty and theology and how we read the Bible conversation. If you missed it last week, we talked just exclusively about the Old Testament, and we did not talk about everything within the Old Testament. We just touched on some of the key parts, and we talked about how the death penalty was kind of used for everything in the Old Testament. It was, you get a death penalty, you get a death penalty, but also how there's some pictures in the Old Testament about how God even was merciful at that time, was arguing for mercy, how God treated the first murderer should be a clue to us about the ethics of the death penalty, the ethics of capital punishment. And so today we're going to look at the New Testament. We're going to look a little bit at how our faith squares with what Jesus says, how what our belief and what we support squares with what Jesus says, and ultimately what the New Testament embodies. And so a few things really quick. How we read the Bible is really important. If we read the Bible as this flat book where everything has equal weight, that's one way to approach the Bible, but it's also going to put you in a position where you're going to the Bible is full of contradictions when you read it that way. Let me just say it that way. So if you are okay with contradictions, if you are okay with one thing being said here and then it being a complete opposite way over here, and really no real good explanation for which one is the right one, like which one trumps the other, which one is the more important way of interpreting my experience or what I should advocate for or how I should live, then if you read the Bible like a flat book and you read it that way, it's going to lead to a lot of confusion if you really want to dive into anything around ethics, how we live, what's proper in a given situation. It can be very challenging to read the Bible that way. If you read the Bible through the lens of Jesus, which just simply means that you center the entire Bible on the life, ministry, and teaching of Jesus, who, Hebrews 1:3 says is the exact representation of God, the full radiance of his glory, the exact representation of his being. If we center the Bible on Jesus, we are far more likely to come to a conclusion that looks like the godly conclusion because Jesus fully represents God. I'm just going to be clear when I say that, and this might be a little bit like of a trigger for some people, but the Israelite people in the Old Testament do not represent God fully. Do they represent God? Sure. But do they represent him fully? No. It seems like the Hebrews writer who's writing to the Jewish people is intent on telling you at the very start of the book, Hebrews 1:3, literally right at the very start of the letter that he's writing to the Hebrew people, you have not seen God accurately represented the way you've seen God accurately represented in Jesus. And so, with that information, it should cause you to reinterpret some of what you know about God, because now we can see clearer. Revelation has happened. The awakening has happened. The eyes have been opened, right? And so in our way of reading the scriptures, it should always be that when we read Jesus and we read something in the Old Testament that seems in conflict, we would center our belief and our understanding and our desire in the way that we would live on Jesus. Now, that doesn't make it easy to read the Bible that way. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of wrestling and seeking and praying and ultimately discerning. I'm not saying this makes an ancient text easy and simple to understand. In these few steps, you'll understand the Bible. No, but I am saying I think it takes us to a place to where we're far more likely to come away with a position and a perspective on the world that looks like Jesus, which I think is what the church has been struggling with of recent and maybe for quite some time, is that we don't look a whole lot like Jesus. We also don't really look a whole lot like the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. We don't look like these things because we're not centering ourselves on the life, ministry, and teachings of Jesus. And so as we look at the second week of the death penalty conversation that we're in, it's also, even if you're like have no care about the death penalty, even if you're like, Justin, why are we talking about the death penalty? I've never heard this talked about in church, which is actually probably a reason why it needs to be talked about in church. But again, I have my own opinions on that. But I guess I would say with that though, even if you're not passionate about the death penalty and you could care less about this conversation, which is fine if that's the case for you, what it is a good way of you examining how we read Scripture. So apply it to any other moral difficulty, any other conversation in the Bible where you have the Old Testament saying something and Jesus saying something else. And this is giving us, hopefully, a collective understanding of like, hey, there's danger when we read the Bible as this flat book. But when we elevate Jesus, because he is the revelation of God, when we elevate Jesus, we come to conclusions that look like Jesus. It's weird that I have to say that because it would seem so obvious that that's the way the first readers understood their faith. And that's the way in a large part of church history, has argued for this way of reading Scripture as well. So as we open the New Testament, let me take a sip of my coffee real quick. that says, I heart sweater weather. I really do heart sweater weather. It's my jam. Hopefully you're hearting some sweater weather. Maybe you've been out in the snow recently, enjoyed some sledding or built a snowman, or you've just stayed inside because you hate the cold. And that's okay if that's you. You can be wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I love the cold, but if you don't, I understand it. It can be annoying sometimes too. So in the New Testament, we have all kinds of places we can go, but I just want to talk about a few of the touch points right off the bat. So right off the bat, Jesus opens his ministry with what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And many of you have heard this statement that like Jesus did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. And this is true. But it's also kind of like, yeah, but he also abolishes parts of the law. He also says, we're not going to live that way anymore. We're not going to do that. And so if you want to think of fulfillment as the next rung on the ladder, like we went from here and now we're over here, but like the last rung is obsolete now. So it's like to say he doesn't want to abolish it is also to say we're moving past that. That's not where we're going anymore. So like it's fulfilled and that it served its time and purpose and now we've moved past it. If that's the way we interpret it, fine. If we interpret it as like some type of equal footing that they're on, or this is kind of a move forward, but we're still going to honor that back there. When he goes through the Sermon on the Mount, he says a lot. You've heard that it was said back here, but I tell you right now. And he's speaking with this like level of authority of a rabbi that's in a lot of ways right there at that point would have been seen as undermining the law of the day. There was things that he said that would have challenged the listeners of his day to be even concerned for how theologically accurate he was. And what I mean by that is just simply like, does this guy really worship God? Like he's kind of undoing some of what God has argued. The law of Moses is the highest of things. And he's arguing like in a lot of ways against the law of Moses on some of these other things. And so that's challenging for his first listeners. And he kicks his first sermon off and he goes after it. Like he doesn't hold back. So if you want to read the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, and you can continue reading, I think it's Matthew 5 through 7. And he's going to say all kinds of things. Jesus says all kinds of things that are challenging to the religious leaders of his day and challenging even to just the common people of the day. But he makes these statements that are even about retribution and the death penalty. He argues for a love for enemies, that the law said, you should hate your enemies. No, you should love your enemies. But he actually brings up a capital punishment verse that we looked at last week, a verse that is smashed between a bunch of kill them, like you get killed if you do that. We talked about that last week. Like even if you disobey your parents, you get killed. So like this verse that he's quoting is kind of the summation or smashed right in between all of that. So when you bring up this verse, the first thing that comes to mind is capital punishment. First thing that comes to mind is retribution for wrongs being done. And so Jesus is conjuring up that particular verse and then says the following. And so this is really, really, really important when we think about, hey, what does Jesus, if Jesus preached a sermon on the death penalty, what would Jesus say? I think he already did, and I think he already said it. And here's what he said in Matthew 5, 38 through 42. You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And so he just quotes a portion of it. It would have gone on to say life for life. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to the one who asks, and do not turn away from the one who would want to borrow. So Jesus' inaugural sermon, he's conjuring up this retributive justice system of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life. Like everyone's thinking about murder in this situation, but he's also breaking it down to someone takes your eye, turn to him the other eye. Like, and then he places it in common context. Hey, if someone slaps you, turn to them the other cheek. hey, if someone takes something from you in court, go ahead and give them it all. Like, and if a Roman soldier asked you to walk a mile, which by the way was the limit that the Roman soldiers were allowed to ask you to walk with their carrying their gear, because their gear weighed something like 50 pounds. So you could carry their gear for a mile, so they didn't have to carry it while they were traveling from one place to the next, but they could only make a common person carry it 1 mile. Hey, when they tell you to put the gear down, keep walking. Say, I'll walk another mile with you. In essence, what he's saying, and we could go really deep into this, but we're not going to, within this particular culture, he's saying the more powerful thing to do is not to get revenge, but to show your humanity. Go even beyond what they're trying to take from you. Show your humanity so that they might be awakened to how unjust what they're doing is. It's very interesting. It's very interesting because this same person gets put on a cross with this same exact mindset, if you will, or the same exact way of living, that Jesus is innocent. Injustice is done to him, and he is placed on a cross for all to see, and dies in a way that is being executed by the state, in a way that many at that time knew was wrong. And so you see this reality that he doesn't just preach this, he lives it, and it actually changes things. It actually pushes against the systems of its day when you lower yourself, when you serve in a way, even the person that's being unjust towards you, by taking on that punishment, even to the point of saying, I'll take on more if it means that your eyes might be opened. Look, this is an absolutely radical call. It is so much easier to get revenge. It is so much easier to look at someone and be like, you are an a-hole. And it's just easier for me to just think that you're never going to change than to think that, you know what, maybe my posture towards you, and maybe me showing and trying to reveal to you the abuse that you're doing to me by just taking on more of it, by not going the retributive route, but going the route that says, sure, I'll walk another mile. No one walks another mile. What are you talking about? Why would you walk another mile? It actually causes them to pause. It disrupts them. It might even shake a little bit of their foundation loose to where change might be possible. Is it always possible? No. Much of the early church was martyred for this exact reason. This call to nonviolence, this call to not return evil for evil. That Paul says that later on, do not return evil for evil. So there's this picture that the early church and the earliest followers of Jesus not only saw this call to nonviolence as part of Jesus' ministry, but central to Jesus' ministry. So not just part of it, but a central part of it. And Jesus continually comes back to it. And I think what I struggle with is that Christians are the biggest supporters of the death penalty, especially evangelical Christians. So as we think about that, what's shocking to me is that Jesus was executed by the state. It would seem like Christians would have, of all religions, the utmost skepticism in institutions committing capital punishment, not only from a theological lens, but also from we have an ancient text that shows when people got it wrong, like with Jesus. And I want to read that passage just so we all recognize that Jesus was punished in a capital punishment, I don't want to hesitate to call it a court, but a judgment that was placed by a political leader for him to be punished. Now, there are all kinds of outside pressure because in this particular time in Jerusalem, we're looking at Passover. Every Passover, they would release a prisoner. Jesus comes into the context of being a prisoner at this time. That next morning, it's between him and this other guy, Barabbas, who's going to be released. And you have this huge mob that kind of comes together because Jesus did some things that weekend that definitely got him put on the radar. If you ever think about flipping the tables, other things like that, there were things that Jesus did that definitely brought himself some attention, that maybe some reputation over that weekend, that definitely had a crowd that were not too happy with him, and came to the point to where they wanted to call for his murder. And so as Pilate, who is the person in charge of this decision for Rome, is considering whether or not this person is guilty, he's come to the conclusion that Jesus is innocent. Like, what he's been accused of, this isn't he should not be executed. We're not going to execute for this. And so he comes to that conclusion, but then the crowd is pushing him to make a decision counter to that. And there's all kinds of politics going on here, because Pilate, being part of Rome and a leader within Rome, a governmental leader within Rome, his ultimate goal is keeping the peace during Passover, because you have just an influx of Jewish people coming in and celebrating their liberation. Think about that. They're celebrating the time when they lived under a superpower called Egypt and they were liberated. And now, as they come together and celebrate that time, they are currently under occupation by Rome. And so Rome obviously recognizes that this is kind of one of those times where, if things go off the rails a little bit, we may be dealing with an uprising and insurrection of sorts. And so they want to be very cautious to make sure that, like, they're appeasing the Jewish people, they're appeasing the people who are coming to them with, words of crucify this person. This person's messed up. So, like, they have this difficult scenario, politically speaking, and just the sociology of the situation, where you have all these different people groups represented, and they have different power dynamics, and Pilate is in charge of trying to make a proper decision in the midst of this. Now, just to be clear, that I'm not trying to ask you to have any empathy or understanding for Pilate. Pilate obviously is a very powerful person in this situation. He could have gone the other way. He chooses not to. But here's how that encounter goes. This is in Luke 23, 13 through 25. Then Pilate called together the leading priests and other religious leaders along with the people, and he announced his verdict. "You brought this man to me, accusing him of leading a revolt. I have examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence and found him innocent. Herod came to the same conclusion and sent him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for the death penalty. So I will have him flogged, then I will release him." Then a mighty roar rose from the crowd, and with one voice they shouted, "Kill him and release Barabbas to us." Barabbas was in prison for taking part in an insurrection in Jerusalem against the government and for murder. Pilate argued with them because he wanted to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the third time he demanded, "Why? What crime has he committed? I have found no reason to sentence him to death. So I will have him flogged, and then I will release him." But the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die as they demanded. As they had requested, he released Barabbas, the man in prison for insurrection and murder, but he turned Jesus over to them to do as they wished. Now, what does this mean? What this means to me is Pilate sentences Jesus to the death penalty. Now, reluctantly, he does everything he can within his political power to get out of doing that, right? Like, he does not want, you can tell by the text, he does not want to sentence Jesus to the death penalty, but he also doesn't want to frustrate all of these religious leaders who have gathered, who have a lot of power in their own right, over a time where they can mobilize that power, because freedom is in the mind and heart and spirit of the Jewish people at this time. And so Pilate has this weird kind of tightrope to walk, and he chooses, hey, the lesser of the two evils here is that I can't risk an uprising, and so this guy who's innocent is just going to have to be crucified. He's going to have to be murdered. And so he calls for the capital punishment. He uses, this is the modern translation, but he uses the phrasing of death penalty. This is something that the state is doing, is executing. And so I say that to just make it clear that there's no argument that Jesus was not a victim of capital punishment. He was a victim of capital punishment. the fact that Christians argue that capital punishment is necessary or good when our Savior, our hero, our our person that we model our lives after, God embodied on earth, whatever you choose to identify Jesus as, Jesus is killed by the state. Jesus experiences the consequences of the death penalty. And at the same time, we say we're following Jesus when we advocate for it. And here's the thing. I actually don't care I don't have as much of a problem with the Christian saying, well, look, my faith is over here, my politics are over here. But what's interesting is how many people will use the Bible or use their faith as a pretext for the death penalty. It's not. It can't be if you're following Jesus. Like those passages back there have been undone. Jesus experiences this reality of death by the state. Now, here's the kicker, the real kicker. While Jesus is experiencing execution, being nailed to a cross, could not even probably, in my opinion, come up with a more painful scenario. If you don't know the science of a crucifixion from the standpoint of what the body goes through, you actually suffocate while experiencing extreme pain. And so Jesus is there experiencing this extreme pain of hanging on a cross, trying to prop his body up so that his lungs can breathe air as they fill up with fluid. And this experience, from what we know of the ancient world, is such a painful experience. And that was the purpose of the experience. The purpose was we execute people publicly on a cross for everyone to see, and it's painful, and then we leave them there. Like Jesus actually got the privilege of being taken down, but we leave them there so that when people come walk by, they see those bones on that cross and they know we don't mess around. Around here, you obey or you get put up there. And that was the purpose, right? And so it was meant to be painful. It was meant to be shameful. It was meant to be this experience that collectively others witnessed and said, "Oh, I'm not going to go I'm not going to go out of line with Rome, because Rome does not play around." And so Jesus is experiencing this reality that is meant to be painful, extremely painful. And in the midst of that pain, in the midst of that agony, he looks at the people who have put him on the cross and he says, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." If that phrase alone does not tell us what our posture should be toward those in our world who commit heinous crimes, murder, I am not saying those people should not experience some amount of judgment. Those people should not be potentially, locked away for life. But I am saying the posture of Jesus toward the people who are executing him as he's experiencing extreme pain is forgiveness. Yet we have a majority of Christians advocating for taking a life. We have a majority of Christians that want to go back to eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, when Jesus not only calls us to something higher, but he embodies and lives out a higher calling. And so you might be saying, "Hey, Justin, here's the deal. All of that's great and fine. I mean, that's kind of like an inferred thing, but here's the deal. We don't have any explicit place where Jesus calls out adultery adultery. I gave away what I'm going to talk about next, where Jesus calls out the death penalty. But we have this moment where he's brought this woman that's caught in adultery, and he literally calls out the death penalty. He says, he actually doesn't say no to it, but he gives a really interesting prerequisite for the death penalty, which I find helpful. Because maybe if we just lived by this prerequisite, then we would either abolish the death penalty or have someone in our midst who is perfect. Here's what is said this is in John 8. Okay? Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of the religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" Now, this is a trap, okay? The purpose of this entire encounter is to trap Jesus. One thing we kind of know from the first century is that the Jewish laws of stoning really aren't taking place, or at least they aren't taking place in any formal or consistent way. So even these individuals advocating for her stoning are probably cautious to stone this person in the first place. But what they are really more concerned about than this woman who was caught in adultery is Jesus, who's teaching this new way that is different from their traditional way. And so they feel very threatened by Jesus. So they're going to consistently throughout the New Testament try to trap Jesus in these scenarios. Hey, should we pay taxes? Hey, what do you think about this woman caught in adultery? Hey, what do you do? Why are you eating with tax collectors? You're not supposed to associate with them. So they're constantly trying to trap him in these scenarios, in these situations. And Jesus is constantly kind of flipping the script, having them look at it from a new lens. But ultimately, what's happening here is Jesus comes to the temple. He has gathered a large crowd. He's speaking to them. Again, these other rabbis, these other leaders, they feel threatened because Jesus is getting the crowds, right? I mean, I guess there's probably some jealousy here. There's probably some frustration with orthodoxy. Jesus is not pure enough for them in his teaching, or he's not upholding Moses' law enough. And so when they even come to Jesus in this situation, they emphasize not just the law, but the law of Moses. And Moses is the one that for them is like this heroic leader, and for them, like this has weight. Moses has weight. The fact that this was Moses' law, we can't go against that. And so they try to trap him in this way. And let's see what happens next. They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. Let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. Very interesting. Could you imagine? I want you to paint. Sometimes I think closing your eyes and like painting a picture of the scriptures is a good thing. So close your eyes with me. Imagine Jesus. I don't know. In my mind, I imagine like all these steps going up to the temple, and Jesus is sitting there talking on the steps, and there's a lot of people around maybe, and all of a sudden they bring this woman to him. I don't know, you go ahead and fill in the blanks on what she looks like. And you have these religious leaders that come to him and they're saying, hey, we need to execute this woman because she was caught in adultery, because that's what Moses says we should do. And Jesus' first response is not to say anything, but to find some like sand or dirt and begin to write in the dirt with his finger. Like, just imagining that scenario is hilarious to me. It's hilarious to me because I'm like, it's kind of disrespectful to ignore them, but it's also kind of like this like playful disarming, like, what do we do next? He's writing in the sand. Like, I've never had someone, when I come to them with like a question this like with this much brevity, them go like play in the sandbox. Like Jesus just begins writing in the sand, and they continue to kind of come at him. Hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to? And then all of a sudden he stands up and he says, all right, go ahead, execute her. But the one who has never sinned must throw the first stone. And then he goes back and continues playing in the sandbox or writing in the sand, which is actually, I would actually say, could be incredibly profound, because there are some theologians and those who study the Bible who have said that he may have very well been writing his mother's name in the dirt, because his mother growing up would have likely consistently been accused of adultery, because of his own origin story, right? Jesus' own origin story has his mom pegged as an adulterer. And so for him, he may be even experiencing this profound feeling of, I've seen your people's judgment of adulterers. I've felt it. I've seen the pain it has caused my own family, my own mother. And I'm writing in the sand her name. I don't know. Who knows what he's doing, right? Could be playing in a sandbox, could be writing something profound. We ultimately don't get those details. But what we do know is that Jesus says, fine, go ahead and execute her. All right. But only if one of you has no sin. Well, that would be problematic because all of these religious leaders know that they've sinned. Just like you and I, all of us know that we have sinned, know that we have made mistakes in our life. And so for us to be the ones to execute this kind of judgment toward another would seem like a faulty system. And Jesus seems to know that right off the bat. Verse 9 says this, when the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? No, Lord, she said. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. Now, if we are to believe that Jesus was perfect and sinless, the posture of Jesus toward this woman, as the person who has the right to throw a stone at her, based on his own way of interpreting the situation, chooses not to. So it also reminds us that, like, even if we do see ourselves as sinless, if we're that prideful, our posture should not be to throw a stone. Our posture should be to call that person to something higher. Go and sin no more. Like, I don't think we can read the New Testament and come to a conclusion that capital punishment is centered on anything other than the Old Testament. Like, it is, and a law that Jesus criticizes and abolishes, I would say, in a lot of ways. Certainly fulfills, if you want to use that language, but not fulfills in a way that we want to go back to it. Fulfills in a way that we want to move past it. And the death penalty is not a law that Jesus, his life, ministry, or teachings, and these are just 3 touch points. I could go even further. There's so much more that Jesus speaks about when he talks about loving your enemies, forgiving those who do you wrong. Like, and it's not to say that justice should not be done in our world, or that our government shouldn't have systems of justice, or even that our government should not execute people. Governments are going to execute people. That's going to happen. That's not something that I have a problem with it, but that's not something I have as much of a problem with as much as I do the fact that Christians are enabling the government and supporting the government and are overwhelmingly in support of the government executing people. It would seem in direct conflict to the figure in which we are called to worship and called to emulate. We're called to be like Christ. If we're called to be like Christ, we don't look a whole lot like Christ when we advocate for the death penalty. So, obviously, this is a potentially challenging message for you. I want to be clear that, like, if you've come to the conclusion that, like, the death penalty is something that you would advocate for, just continue examining Scripture. Like, continue considering whether you read the Bible like a flat book. And also consider the implications of that, not just on the death penalty, but on other things that Jesus moves the ball forward on. And also consider, like, why? Like, what part of me feels like this system is a good thing? Do we ever get it wrong? We talked about this last time a little more, the reality that, like, getting it wrong once is enough to call into question the whole system. And we've clearly got it wrong more than once. And so, I mean, murdering someone who did not commit the crime that they are accused of is awful, absolutely horrid. And we have within our ancient text, within our origin story as followers of Jesus, central to it, someone who is murdered by the state that was innocent. So it should seem that we would be the first to come and advocate for that type of a system that might murder someone who's innocent, to be called into question, to be examined. And at the very least, if we're not going to be against it, we're not going to be for it. So I'd love your questions. You can email Justin at thebelongcollective.org. I'm confident I did not cover these two parts fully. And I would love your support. Tonight, I'm actually going to a prayer vigil in DC with a bunch of other religious leaders who are gathering for the purpose of calling into question the death penalty. Every 5 years, there's a collection of groups that gather together in DC and that really petition the government to consider, from even a religious perspective, like the call to abolish the death penalty. And so I'm going to be gathering with them tonight. We will be gathering for a prayer vigil, and then tomorrow morning, Monday morning, we will be marching in DC and visiting the Supreme Court, Congress, and in the White House as well. There'll be a delegation going there as well to just deliver a petition that says, hey, we feel compelled to call into question the death penalty and to challenge even you as our leaders to reconsider whether or not this system is ethical, right, or moral. And I'll have a link to that particular petition if that's something you want to sign and participate in. I really would appreciate your prayers as I'm participating in this direct action over the next 2 days. And thank you for kind of going on this 2-week journey of the death penalty with me. I think I can't think of a time where this has been talked about in church growing up. I feel like I say that more often, with sermons. But I do think it's a relevant conversation. We've seen over the last couple years a lot of people on death row who have claimed innocence, and even had people like the Innocence Project behind them who have been advocating for their innocence with science and even with just the ways in which they weren't represented well when they were convicted. And so it's definitely in the forefront of a lot of people's hearts and minds, especially those who are interested in matters of justice. And so I thank you for journeying on this journey with me. I'm going to close this in prayer, and I pray you have a blessed rest of your Sunday. Good and gracious God, thank you for this time together where we examined your scripture last week in the Old Testament around capital punishment, and this week as we looked at the life, ministry, and teachings of Jesus and examined how those center our beliefs and the way in which we advocate for and against things in this world. And so, God, as we look at the life of Jesus, we see that Jesus took a side when it came to capital punishment. He didn't try to play the middle. Like, he took a side. He said, this isn't okay. Like, an eye for an eye isn't helping. And he stood between a woman and a religious group who was advocating for her death and called into question their own purity. And so may we, even as we advocate for anything, not just the death penalty, especially anything that would harm or place judgment over someone else, as we consider that, may we also consider our own faults, our own sins, our own brokenness, and ask how we would want to be handled. God, it's kind of like when we cut someone off in traffic and how we wave and say, we're sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And then 10 minutes later, someone cuts us off and we curse at them. God, remind us that how we would want to be handled if we were in that situation. With mercy, with grace, with love, with care, with concern. And God, that is a challenging thing. It is a challenging thing to feel wronged or to be actually deeply wronged by somebody, and to respond with mercy and grace. God, give us the strength to respond in that way. God, allow your light to shine on us so that we may shine that into the world. And not in some kind of like, I don't know, poofy positive, whatever fluffy, light type. I mean, light shining in the world, meaning we are going to make a sacrifice even to shine your light. We're going to lay down our lives so that light might shine. We're going to take on the pain and release the debt and forgive those who have hurt us so that your light may shine brighter in this world. We need more of this in our world. Obviously, we need it in this particular area, but we need it in the way we talk to people, in the way we love people, in the way we relate to one another. We need to leave judgment, and we need to enter into mercy. And we need that for our own stories as well. Reveal that to us, God. In the name of Jesus, amen.